It's important to acknowledge the fact and study the fact that our climate on Earth has changed, both in the long term and in the short term. The focus on this climate change is that it's changing due to human causes, and it's changing in a way that we haven't really seen before, and that a way that we know measurably is worrisome. So, one kind of idea is this idea of continental drift. This was kind of a big long-term change in our climate and in Earth in general. The idea of the plate tectonics that have kind of moved, and that Earth's continents have moved over the surface of the globe for hundreds of millions of years. Now, again, this is a huge change, but keep in mind the timeline that it's happened on. Over time, one large supercontinent split up into the continents that we see today. This happened over 200 and some odd million years. Why are we not concerned about this versus climate change? Well, this happened over several hundred millions of years, whereas the changes in Earth's climate are very profound and they're happening over a relatively small period of time. So let's take a quick look at continental drift and why we think it matters. Well, it caused changes over these 100 or 200 million years in ocean and wind patterns, which affects heat transfer. It redistributed large swaths of land, and of course that can kind of affect whether the winter or summers are different based on the land mass's location on the globe, relative to the equator, and what kind of new bodies of water might be around it. And it caused mountain ranges or relief patterns in the earth to form, and this having large mountains can also affect the regional climate in an area. If we go back 400,000 years, we can see how temperature has changed over time, and it's believed that the Earth's climate cycles between ice ages and interglacial periods. So where an ice age is a period of time when the Earth is cold and much of the planet is covered in ice, whereas an interglacial period is a time where the Earth heats up. About 20,000 years ago, the Earth experienced its last ice age. The average temperature was about 10 degrees lower than it is today, and we had sheets of ice about 3 kilometers thick that covered much of Canada. So today, we are in an interglacial or a warming period. However, again, it's important to note that the warming that we're experiencing is unusually high, and that's where these climate concerns kind of start. We acknowledge we are in a warming period, but that warming period that we're in doesn't necessarily correlate with the high temperatures that we're seeing, and in relation to the output of man-made carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So we know that Earth orbits around the sun, but Earth's orbit can kind of change in 3 ways. We talk about eccentricity, which is the shape of the orbit. So we can get a more elliptical orbit versus a more circular orbit. We talk about the tilt of the Earth that affects the season, whether the Earth is tilted inwards or away relative to the sun. And then we talk about the precession, the wobble of the Earth on its axis. The Earth's wobble is important. It's not huge. This diagram greatly exaggerates the precession and even the tilt of the Earth. And these things do affect the climate. And again, we acknowledge that these things do exist, but it's important to realize that the changes that we're seeing today doesn't quite match up with the change in eccentricity or tilt or precession of the Earth. So what about some short-term variations? How can things affect the climate kind of immediately? Well, things like volcanic eruptions will spew rocks, dust, and gases into the atmosphere. Things like sulfur dioxide, SO2. Sulfur dioxide can reflect the sun and might cool down the Earth temporarily. Small changes in the radiation due to the sun. The amount of solar radiation does change in small amounts every 11 years or so. And so that might have an effect on the climate on Earth in that particular year or in that particular kind of decade. And of course, the climate changes that we're seeing kind of long outlast that solar radiation change. Some changes in air and ocean currents do occur regularly. A dramatic change over the Pacific Ocean happens every 3 to 7 years. And again, right, the changes we're seeing in Earth's climate kind of outlive those changes at the Pacific Ocean. So we can be relatively sure that the climate change we're seeing is not just due to some reoccurring natural phenomenon.